What does an orchid look like? Orchids come in such a stunning variety of shapes and colors. I remember seeing one with delicate, intricate patterns that looked almost like a work of art. Are orchids toxic to cats? Are orchids harmful to dogs? From my experience, orchids aren't toxic to cats or dogs, but I'd still keep them out of reach just in case. Are orchids edible? I've tried tasting a bit of orchid flower, and while it's not harmful, it didn't have much flavor and seemed more decorative than edible. Why are my orchid leaves turning yellow? Yellowing orchid leaves were a puzzling issue for me. It turned out my plant was getting too much direct sunlight, which caused the stress. What color is orchid? Orchids are known for their dazzling array of colors, from vivid purples and pinks to subtle whites and yellows, making them a versatile choice for any decor. How to repot an orchid with air roots? Repotting an orchid with air roots was a bit tricky for me. I found it best to gently position the roots in the pot and secure them with a bit of orchid mix to keep them stable. Do orchids need sun? In my experience, orchids prefer bright, indirect light rather than direct sun, which can scorch their leaves. Why is my orchid wilting? When my orchid started wilting, it was often due to either overwatering or a sudden change in temperature, so I adjusted care accordingly. Are orchids parasites? I've never had an orchid act like a parasite. They're more of an epiphyte, meaning they grow on other plants but don't harm them. Can orchids grow outside? Orchids can thrive outside in the right climate. I've had success with them on a shaded patio where they receive filtered sunlight. Do orchids like humidity? Humidity has been a game changer for my orchids. They seem to thrive in a humid environment, especially in my bathroom with regular misting. Are blue orchids real? While blue orchids are marketed, I found that true blue orchids are rare and often dyed. The natural color range is more diverse. Are orchids fragrant? The fragrance of orchids varies. Some have a light, sweet scent, while others are more subtle, but I always enjoy the gentle aroma. How to attach an orchid to a tree? Attaching an orchid to a tree required a bit of patience. I used orchid clips and moss to keep it secure and make sure it could anchor itself properly. How to clean orchid leaves? Cleaning orchid leaves is straightforward. I simply wipe them gently with a damp cloth to remove dust without damaging the delicate surface. Where do orchids grow naturally? Orchids naturally grow in diverse environments, from tropical rainforests to subtropical regions, often on trees or rocks where they catch moisture from the air. Are orchids air plants? Orchids are not air plants. They need a medium to anchor their roots, though they can adapt to various growing conditions. How much do orchids cost? The cost of orchids varies widely. I've seen them range from affordable ones at local stores to expensive, rare varieties at specialty shops. Do orchids like coffee grounds? Coffee grounds can be a great addition to orchid care for a boost of nutrients, but I use them sparingly to avoid potential issues with soil acidity. Is my orchid dead or dormant? Determining whether an orchid is dead or dormant can be tricky. If the roots are still firm and the plant seems to have some life, it might just be resting. How often to put ice cubes in orchids? Putting ice cubes in orchids is a tip I tried. It's supposed to provide a slow release of water, but I found it works best as a supplement to regular watering. How to grow orchids without soil? Growing orchids without soil is fascinating. I've experimented with hydroponic setups and found that they can thrive in water or orchid-specific mediums. What is the best fertilizer for orchids? I've had good results with a balanced orchid fertilizer, applying it every few weeks to support healthy growth and blooming. How cold can orchids tolerate? Orchids can tolerate surprisingly low temperatures. I've seen them survive a drop to around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but they generally prefer warmer conditions. Should I repot my orchid after buying? After buying an orchid, I usually repot it to ensure it's in the best medium for its health and to check for any root issues. Can you propagate an orchid from a leaf? Propagating an orchid from a leaf is not something I've tried successfully. Typically, orchids are propagated from keikis or stem cuttings for better results.